Welcome into the Gaming Discourse. I'm Tyler Frater alongside Richard A. the Cruz.
I wasn't ready.
And Chief Engineer Lieutenant Commander Connor Frater.
I'm always ready.
It is Monday, October 9th, 2023. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Gaming Discourse, youtube.com/Gaming Discourse, patreon.com/The Gaming Discourse. You can support us for $247, $10. Get your name in the video credits, early access to videos, access to our Discord server, and more. Patreon members also get weekly updates, and I have some good news. There's a video coming out soon. Patreon members will get more specifics, but it's getting pretty somewhat close to the video phase. Not there yet, but we made good headway. Thank you. Made good headway these past few days on the script. Okay, so we've got news. John Riccitiello is out at Unity. That just happened a while ago.
Good riddance.
We won't. I don't think we
just reported it. See you later.
I don't think we're planning on discussing or anything.
Yeah, it only happened a couple hours ago. So
yeah, and okay, that's. I guess we'll see. I don't know. The whole Unity pricing thing was not the only thing at Unity that has made people angry. And I don't know if this is like the reason he's out, or if it's just the general sense of disdain that has grown around Unity in his tenure or whatever. But man, there are a lot of video game executives who it just seems like no matter what they do, all they do is go places and make people angry. John Riccitiello is one. Who's the guy with Stadia? Phil Harrison.
Phil Harrison, yeah.
Another, and I'm sure they're good people. Maybe not Riccitiello, but I'm sure, I don't know if Phil Harrison's necessarily a bad dude.
But he fucked up 3 times. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It just seems like...
Majorly 3 times.
Oh, no, Bobby Kotick's always been the owner of
since
Activision.
07 or 08.
Right? Because he bought into Activision pretty early.
Yeah, his first major fuck up was getting rid of Vince Zampella from Infinity Ward during Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah, well, because he's known as being... Okay, so he still sucks, but he hasn't hopped around a bunch of companies. Anyway, so yeah, John Riccitiello is out. See you later. Bye-bye. And we'll see where Unity goes from here. Okay, so let's talk. Connor, why don't you discuss what you've been playing? And
a lot of Baldur's Gate 3.
Go around the table. Okay, and you have reported that it's running much better on PS5.
Yes. Split screen is still running, or is running a lot better. It's still a little slower than single player because it's rendering everything twice. But it's still holding up fairly well. Minimal issues with latency or anything like that. Just when a lot of explosions or a lot of spell casting is going on, then it just slows down for a second until it all resolves, then it continues back to normal. Doing really well now. The patches have been really good for console. The game is still continuing to be as fun as any D&D campaign should be. And just as many hijinks as you can have in normal D&D.
Do you have a specific example?
I talked about it last week with talking mini bosses into offing themselves.
Yeah. Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Yeah. And then just knowing how D&D works and then finding items that help facilitate a certain build, my single player character, the Paladin, I drop bosses really quick with Smite because I have everything lined up to smite as much as possible with the maximum amount of damage, and I can always get really close to a crit, so I'm always hitting really hard. And then with the smiting critical, I drop bosses to half their life with a single hit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, it is one of those games where if you can figure out bosses' weaknesses and if you can exploit that, you can make things way easier. I got into a boss fight that was against a couple enemies with 200 health. There were 2 of them. I think there were just 2 of them. 200 health, and then the boss had 360 health. And they were susceptible to lightning damage. And I have a sorcerer who's max level level 12, and one of my most powerful spells is a level 6 chain lightning, right? Yeah. So it hits one enemy and then it bounces to another enemy within 18 meters or something like that. But my sorcerer also has an ability where I can cast I have a staff that allows me to cast a spell without costing a spell slot.
Okay.
Which is really good because that's a level 6 spell. You only have one level 6 spell slot. So if I cast that using that staff's ability, I can then cast it again because I'll still have the spell slot. And then I have another ability where, and I forget where I got this. I don't think it's from gear. I think it has to do with my sorcerer subclass. But I can choose a defense bonus to a specific element, and then I get a bonus in attack damage for that element. So going into this fight, I knew that this boss was likely going to be susceptible to electricity or lightning. So I activated that. I gave myself a lightning defense, and I gave myself a lightning buff for damage. And I ended up, they didn't even get an attack off. This massive boss that came up from the floor, and it was this really cool entry, didn't even get an attack off once because I killed it and took all its damage, all its health before it was even the boss's turn. So stuff like that, and to me that's not. I don't know. I think it's one of those games where, one, if you can find ways to cheese around enemies and stuff in Elden Ring, more power to you, whatever. Yeah. But I feel like in Baldur's Gate specifically, there is no cheesing. If you can find like creative ways around things,
I will say there's kind of ways to cheese the game.
I don't know. I mean, how so?
Okay, so one of the fights, if you keep Asterion, or if you just have one of the hireling rogues, or if you're a rogue, you can hit him before he casts a spell that makes the fight a lot more difficult.
Okay, interesting.
So if you hit him with like the Susur dagger, so it silences him, then he can't cast spells.
Yeah.
And so the fight goes from him with like 30 allies to him all by himself and not being able to cast.
Yeah, but that just means, but you can just gamify that as like the one of the players was like, I want to perceive, and they rolled 40 or something crazy. So it's like, fine, if you do this, the boss is.
I guess.
Yeah.
But another way of like kind of cheesing is what I do is I just pick up enemies and throw them off cliffs with Karlach.
That's awesome.
Karlach doesn't really attack anymore. She's more of a just, you're going over here now, and just throws people places.
Just picking people up and tossing them nice. Yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 is really good, and I'm not sure there's a whole lot more to say about it. And it has gotten a lot better in updates. I'm pretty close to the ending. I've done a lot of the major stuff, and like I said, at level 12, I have it's max level, and it does a good job of. I don't think a lot of games are like this nowadays because they're just made differently. But the first Baldur's Gate was like this. I think a lot of people. I never played a lot of Morrowind. People described Morrowind this way, maybe Skyrim, but you really do feel like a much more powerful person at the end of Baldur's Gate, as opposed to something like, I don't know, in like Cyberpunk, you had more abilities and you were more powerful and stuff, but it wasn't like you felt like you had transcended to this like new level of power and ability, you know? Where Baldur's Gate does that. So, and at level 12 with my lightning spells and all the stuff I can do, it definitely feels like Gale has a spell where I cast an orb, he casts an orb, and all characters inside that orb are invulnerable to all damage.
Oh, auto-resilient sphere?
Yeah, so it's like I was fighting a boss that had some massive AoE spell that was one of those, if it hits you, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
So I cast that and put everybody inside perfectly fine, and that's how and as the boss was like charging it up, I just kept because you can cast spells out of it, out of this dome. You just can't get hit while you're inside, or if you attack somebody that's also inside of it, they won't take any damage. So you get like really powerful spells that you can really be creative and do all kinds of like powerful tricks with and stuff like that. Okay. Anything else besides Baldur's Gate 3?
No.
Richard?
I haven't played anything.
Okay.
Want to talk more Baldur's Gate 3?
So the one thing that I did finish, there's a bunch of games that I need to start checking off my list. I need to finish the 2 remaining chapters of Alan Wake, the bonus chapters.
The Writer and the Signal.
The Signal and the Writer, whichever, yeah. I need to finish those off, which I don't think they're very long.
They're not, no.
Yeah.
They're probably somewhere between 3 to 5 hours each.
Okay, so hopefully I can... Wait, each episode?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They were both expansions.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I need to hop on that.
Back when expansions were actual content and not just cut content added back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I also finished Separate Ways, which was very good. And I wanted to ask you, Richard, about because you're our Resident Evil expert on this podcast.
Resident Evil expert.
Resident Evil expert. I don't know if you considered yourself a Resident Evil. We're just going to give you that title.
Hyperfixated. Yeah, sure. like a lot of other series.
What you think they should do with Resident Evil 5, because the 4 remake was really good. Separate Ways sets up the series to sort of continuously go into 5. Wesker seems like he's going to be a focus going in. And of course, you haven't finished Separate Ways, so you'll have to talk about if there's any like major differences between the two Adas and how they characterize them or whatever. But I know that generally speaking, I don't know if you agree with this, that like 5 was sort of where the series took a dip, and then and I remember 6. I never played 6, but I remember 6 being not very popular.
Yeah.
And then 7's where they went first person and they introduced Ethan and all that. And so that's kind of where the series, I guess, went back up, for lack of a better term. But what do you think there? What do you think?
So, yeah. 5 was where they kind of... People got worried with 4 because they did what Dead Space 2 did. And it was like half action, half horror. And people enjoyed that. But with Resident Evil 5, they started to lean off of the horror aspect and go more into the action aspect. They added co-op, which... is very cool when you have it when you play it with another character, but the AI partner that you have for a lot of people does not work correctly and is more of a hindrance than there is someone who's helpful throughout the game. I have already like expressed my opinion, and I don't think they should move on to 5. I think they should redo Code Veronica first, which was a Dreamcast and PS2 game, which is an actual continuation of Resident Evil 2. You follow Claire as she's looking for Chris. In Resident Evil 2, you find the file that Chris is on. He's in Europe. And so you go after him as Claire, and then
Code Veronica takes place on a boat, doesn't it?
No, Code Veronica takes place in Europe and Antarctica.
Oh, okay. Ready.
Yeah. So, but that introduces Wesker again for the very first time. And that shows how he becomes... the superpowered being that he is now. So if there are any new players who haven't played the old ones, if they're going to play 5, they're kind of going to be confused about how this guy is able to do all these things. Sure. They may or may not be. They could just accept it. People can accept it. But when it comes to 5, if they do remake it, I think they can strengthen the co-op aspect of it, bring back some more of the horror. But I think that one thing that's debatable is they're going to have to approach the story and the location a bit differently, because it took place in Africa, a village in Africa, and of course there are claims of like
there were certain like racial racial uncomfortabilities and awkwardnesses about which I even remember that when the game came out,
which is funny because that argument isn't made for Resident Evil 4 when it's the same exact idea, but but there is like, areas that you go to later in the game that are very like, oh, these are, tribalistic people, and they do the stereotypical
stereotypes
like,
and maybe
looks,
some
so
insensitivities.
They would probably have to, redo that again if they were to recreate Resident Evil 5. And I don't, I would welcome it because I love Resident Evil. Resident Evil 5 is probably my favorite one. Only because of the entertainment I received from it, not for the fact that Resident Evil 2 is way better. Resident Evil 4 is way better. 5 plays the same as Resident Evil 4 in my opinion, but from an entertainment factor, I like it a little more. But it leans into the monster horror than it does actual realistic horror that you would find from pseudo-realistic horror you'd find from Resident Evil 4 and 2.
Alrighty, cool. Yeah, I'm excited to see what they do because I think Resident Evil 4, the remake, was just so freaking good. And so they have themselves on a really cool trajectory to figure out how to like rectify, not a mistake, but just sort of where the series started to be unpopular, falter, however you want to put it, which is interesting. But at the same time, Resident Evil 8 was really good too.
Yeah,
So it's like they have that whole thing to go off of.
I think
They're in a really weird spot because they're like remaking the prequels and they have a chance to make them better.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Resident Evil 7 and 8 were both pretty good. Resident Evil 8 I think was better. So
the entire series is weird because there are a group of people who are clamoring for a remake of Resident Evil 1 as they did with Resident Evil 2 and 4, but there are a very good amount of people who still consider Resident Evil 1 to be like the best it could be. Like, I don't think they would be able to change it. And I think it was because mostly it was a different approach. Like Resident Evil 1 and 2 have different approaches in the sense. If you play the both originals, they kind of have different approaches. And number 1, absolutely still to this day, is very much more horror based than anything. Mm-hmm. It is designed as a horror game, whereas 2 is definitely a horror, survival horror as well. But of course, you have that action aspect to it. Like, Alien versus Aliens.
Yeah, and I also think stylistically, it's almost the difference between Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, because you go from those like PS1 camera, like weird camera angles and stuff, top down, side, whatever, where it's like a security camera. You go from that to a more traditional third-person camera
control, right?
So it's like maybe people out there would like to see a Resident Evil 1 with like a first-person cam. I'm not sure how much you would have to change things for that, but because the HD remake that they made was just the same camera angles and stuff. It wasn't like they had a third person.
They didn't have a third person, but they did have. They did have modern controls, so they weren't tank controls. You could actually control it. They redeveloped it so that you could control it as a normal third-person game, which was fine, but also a little weird too, because it's just that. It's like in Metal Gear Solid 1, the way that the characters talk, they just kind of like move their like heads is kind of like, it makes it for you. Like it's kind of, that's why you like it, because you could tell that they're moving. But like when they start to have like moving lips and stuff, there's a certain charm that's like kind of gone at that moment.
I know what you mean.
Yeah,
sure.
But I don't think that they could do anything to fix Resident Evil 6, especially story wise. Because I
don't remember Resident Evil 6.
So that one was with Leon.
They did 3. So there's 3 campaigns in Resident Evil 6. There's a campaign for Leon, which is like more Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4 based, and then there's a campaign with Chris that is just all action. Like there's an action movie
noise,
and then there is another one with Jake. His name is Jake, but that is also like more action as well. But I don't know. It all delves. I like the gameplay on it, but pretty much boils down to this scientist is in love with Ada, and Ada doesn't give a shit, so he turns himself into a T-Rex or something.
You know, I think one direction that they could go with Resident Evil 9 is sort of a like SCP horror special forces type angle. I think would be cool.
They've had so many. There was a game called Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City where you played as the Umbrella agents who were sent into Raccoon City during Resident Evil 2 to clean up the mess. And it was this non-canon game because at certain points you would encounter the heroes and you could choose to whether kill them right there or then. or like go on, and the story would change based on what you do. But it was a team-based game, multiplayer story, and it would have been really cool, but it's just a zombie should not take more than a clip to take out from an AR or from an assault rifle.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
But I think a horror game with like a lot of SCP tries this. It's a weird synthesis of like special forces tactics with weird horror monsters. Mm-hmm. But there are military sims where you throw on night vision goggles and you're clearing a shack and you're just like, this is a horror game. It's terrifying. Because some of the effects, like, what's the game called? Ground Branch is a mil sim that is in early access right now that I've played for a while. And it's really, you throw on your night vision and it's really creepy and stuff like that. Same thing with Insurgency. So I just feel like there's something there. And while I was playing separate ways, I got the scope that shows you like the body heat or
The
whatever. Infrared, yeah. And so I was going through, instead of using Ada's flashlight, I was just walking through some of the parts of the level just with this scope on, because it doesn't zoom so far that you can't, like, it's like too difficult to walk with. And I was like, this is really creepy. So imagine throwing on night vision and, you know, you turn the corner and there's some zombie whose eyes are all like lit up from the infrared and the night vision or whatever. That would be really creepy. And also the end of Resident Evil 8, you play as Chris for like 30 minutes.
It was a very cool sequence.
Which was very cool. And I was like, how cool would that, or Hunk, right?
Yeah.
At the end of Resident Evil 2, there's that bonus mission where you have all like the special forces gear. That's a little special challenge thing where you have to like escape as fast as possible. But I think no one has really, put together that idea perfectly yet. I think Resident Evil could probably do it, where you have some badass, like, I don't know, M4 with a laser and a variable sight on it. And so it makes you feel like a badass, but then you don't have a lot of ammo, so you really have to like pick and choose when to use it. That could be cool. I don't know. We're just writing fan fiction.
Yeah,
just writing fan fiction at this point. Okay, let's hit the ad. Thanks for listening. If you like our content, please consider subscribing or leaving a like and comment. You can find us at patreon.com/thegamingdiscourse. And our tiers are $2, $4, $7, and $10 and include getting your name in the video credits, early access, and access to our Discord server. 5 former Ubisoft executives have been arrested. This was first reported by Liberation, which is a French newspaper. Among those arrested are Sergei Hascoe, I don't know how to pronounce his name, who is the former chief creative officer, and Tommy Francois, who is the former VP of editorial and creative services. The arrests followed complaints by Solidaire Informatique, which is a French union that covers digital design and video game workers. That's according to a translated Wikipedia page, so the specifics are probably a little lost there. Maud Beckers, who is the plaintiff's lawyer, says the complaints go beyond individual actions and expose systemic sexual violence. That's a quote there, systemic sexual violence, which is something that I think when all the news was breaking seemed like was the case once all the people from Ubisoft Montreal across the ocean to Ubisoft in France, so many people were leaving. That kind of seemed like the case. What do we think about this?
It's great to see some comeuppance when it comes to this, because we reported a lot of stories, especially during the first years that the Activision Blizzard thing, this came about, and then we had a bunch of other smaller studios, but it was always the same, the same ending, and it was, we hired an external investigation group and then you hear nothing. And so with this, it's kind of big news that some of the main perpetrators of these unfortunate situations have been arrested, and that is good because there's a lot of damning evidence against them.
It seems like it
with the Cosby Suite and all that.
All kinds of weird
all that stuff. So, so it must be pretty serious if they were to be sought out and arrested, especially a year and a half after the news broke. So.
Yeah, that's maybe the craziest thing is if this were to happen in the US, I think if this were to happen to a US company, this would be such a bigger deal. Like, I think there'd be more coverage on this. But again, much like with the Activision Blizzard thing, like the Wall Street Journal was writing stories about Bobby Kotick and shit like that. But because Ubisoft is a French company, and they're like mainly local, I think they have a studio in San Francisco.
San Francisco and Montreal are the big ones.
Yeah, but like it's mostly a foreign publisher / studio, so it's like a lot of the news that comes out has been from French publications and stuff like that. But had this been an American company, this would be a much bigger story on sort of your general media spaces and whatnot. But yeah, I my mind goes back to the time that there was a Ubisoft shareholder or somebody who asked Yves You, like, there are 3 things that could happen that have happened, and this was in the middle of all the fallout. Either you didn't know what was going on, which looks pretty bad because you're the CEO. You did know, which looks pretty bad because you're the CEO, or you partly knew and didn't do anything, which is pretty bad because you're the CEO. Yeah. So it's like, what's the case there? And his response was essentially, someone betrayed our trust and blah blah blah, right? I'm not an expert in American law. French law might as well be the French language, which it is, I guess.
How are you in bird law?
But like, I don't know. I think it's just stunning to me that something that the right-hand man of Ubisoft did, even if he wasn't arrested for it, we know that it was horrible, right? Mm-hmm. But it rises to the point where he is arrested, and the CEO knew some of it, mm-hmm. or didn't know any of it, which means there was illegal activity happening right under his nose. And I don't know. I don't know how a CEO like that keeps their job. Calling for like people to be fired or let go or step down is something that I've always like cringed when like sports media guys do it, you know, like fire him, get him out of town, whatever. Because it's such a sucky thing to happen to athletes and whatnot. But if you do something illegal, like I have no problem saying that if an athlete, you know, is charged with domestic violence, they should just be kicked out of the league. I don't have a problem with that. So in this case, it's like you have some ridiculous systemic like misogyny, the systemic like environment that is misogynistic and sexual harassment is happening everywhere apparently. I don't know how you keep your job as CEO. Mm-hmm. Because that's a complete like institutional failure. So whatever. Ubisoft has claimed in the past that they have fixed things, that things are getting better. You know, I don't necessarily know if any of. I'm sure some of it's true. I'm sure they've made improvements, but you're improving from a place that you should have never been in the first place, mm-hmm. and that bothers me. That it's like they'll make such a big deal at the same thing with Riot. Where it's like, look at all the improvement we made. But the point is, you shouldn't have had to make these improvements in the first place. Mm-hmm. And you have no defense in that. And so, I don't know. Yeah, but it's still stunning to me that the CEO of one of the 5 or 6 major video game companies in the world was one step away from a guy who is now arrested mm-hmm. for... I don't know what it is for specifically, but apparently for something adjacent to sexual assault or harassment or just, I don't know, something that you can be arrested for. And Yves was right there. Do we have anything else we want to say before we move on?
I think so.
When it comes to like newer employees being hired by Ubisoft, I'm pretty certain they all have to sign NDAs, right?
Probably on some level. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wonder how many are signing it without having a lawyer look at it.
I don't know.
I know it's because the problem is it's expensive to do that, and so these folks need a job. So it's kind of like mm-hmm. So maybe that's the reason why we're not hearing more about it, or we haven't heard about anything since then, because Ubisoft says they could fix things, but they might have, who knows? But because we're not hearing about it, but. They also probably fix their contracts as well when people sign so that they can't, say anything.
Yeah, and but I also think at this day and age, people are more ready to talk to the press, and they're more willing to just say if something bad happened to them.
True.
In some ways, I guess. We'll talk about that when we get to Daedalic in a bit. So yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know the laws around NDAs because I've always assumed that NDAs weren't like if you signed one, you didn't lose your soul, right? If you sign if I brought you guys to do this podcast and I had you sign an NDA and then I murdered somebody, it's not like, thanks for reporting the murder, Richard, but you're going to jail too. You promised not to say. I'm sure there are laws that say you can't like go to jail for reporting crimes or something. I don't know. I assume, again, not a lawyer. Anyway, okay, we'll move on. Streamers are shilling for Shill. This is first reported by Media Matters. Shill partnered with Fortnite map creators to make Shill-themed maps, and streamers played those maps, and I don't know, the details don't matter. The point is, there's these Fortnite creators, they made maps, and these streamers played on the maps, and it was all partnered with a massive oil company. So that's the gist of it. I'm not going to give you the details about
We're sorry.
Going back to August, streamers who participated, I don't know any of these people, include Nate Hill, Chica, Punisher, Ghost Woe, and more. I just want to point out that the fact that a streamer's name is Punisher and this Punisher guy signs a deal with an
Sells
oil
out to an oil company.
I just put in parentheses, irony has shot itself in the face because let me tell you what, the actual Punisher from the comics, he's not signing deals with Shill. Well, he's signing certain kinds of deals, but
He's signing shells.
he's signing shells, but he's not signing deals, let me tell you. Anyway, as Kotaku and Media Matters have pointed out, this is part of an effort by Shill to pivot back to focusing on gasoline rather than cleaner energy sources. Maybe in Resident Evil 9, Chris can fight evil oil corporations that decide to they're like, hey, you know what? Enough of this clean energy stuff. How about more of the T-virus, baby?
Sweet oil,
they're putting the T-virus in the gasoline so it turns the cars into...
So it turns the cars gay, yeah.
They'll have Maximum Overdrive Part 2.
What do we think about this?
It's pretty ridiculous. It's very ridiculous. I think that I'm not going to say common knowledge, but a lot of the younger generation, starting with like my generation and younger, we all know and we have known that gasoline is a finite resource. Like it's not, you can't put the eyes back on it when we know that there's not going to be any eventually. So it's really weird. And also the folks who are watching these streamers who are watching Fortnite, how many of them have cars? Like, I'm talking about like the age ranges, you know.
Sure.
I'm not, Fortnite is for everybody, but its demographic is the younger audience. So how many of them truly care about this? I know it sucks and it's very, very cringeworthy, but money talks. Unfortunately, especially for smaller streamers,
you've got to have some kind of principles. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be the moral asshole. I don't give a shit. You got to have some kind of like, if you have an audience, you have a responsibility. I don't know. So there's got to be some kind of principle there. There's got to be some kind of respect to your audience to not just be, and also self-respect. Like, do you just want to be a commercial? Is that what you want to do with your platform, with your hard work, is just turn yourself into a commercial? I don't know. I don't want to do that.
Oh, he plays poker.
But... Oh, is that one of the...
He's a gambler.
His Nate Hill primarily streams League, but also poker is his next highest, then Fortnite.
Very nice. And that Fortnite is color-coded yellow, fittingly. So that thing bothers me. But also, like, kids today are smarter than ever, I think. Mm-hmm. I'm not somebody... People are like, oh, TikTok's ruining our generation. And it's like, have you talked to an 11-year-old who's, like, making a game in... Unreal right now because they watched somebody on YouTube? Like, kids are not morons today. There's a lot of stupid kids out there, sure. Mm-hmm. But I think kids are smarter than ever, and they know how to type in, Shell into Google and find stuff out about Shell the same way that we do. So this idea that, I don't know, you put something in front of kids and they're automatically just going to just soak it up, I don't necessarily think it's true.
It also doesn't help that when I look at two gas stations and one has Shell, it's like 50 cents more expensive than like the other one, and I'm just like,
and because of this, if it was 50 cents cheaper, you're still going to the more expensive gas station just because you're annoyed. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess that's what bothers me about this. And it's like, how do we, I don't know, I think as games media, we need a way to, I don't know, ask these people, ask Punisher or Chica or whoever the fuck Ghost Woe is. First of all, ask him, I don't know if Woe is like his last name or something, so I don't want to be mean. But like, ask why do this? Is it just money? Is it just money? And then have them say that. And then I think there's value in that. I think there's value in somebody being honest with you and just laying out that they have taken their humanity and flattened it into a poster that can be slapped on the side of a building or a billboard.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, if you're willing to admit that, then fine. At least we got there. At least we got to some point of authenticity. But and I think that's important. I think if that's what you're going to do with your content, and your content has enough influence that an oil conglomerate is going to spew a little bit of money at you, which I'm sure they like. I'm sure the money that Shell paid these people is nothing compared to the money that they have sloshing around in different directions for different things. But yeah, and you know, Cecilia D'Anastasio has. I remember when our story with we covered a story about gambling a few months ago, and Cecilia D'Anastasio interviewed somebody, one of the streamers that was super into like loot box gambling or whatever, and the guy said essentially, I'm addicted and I tell my audience not to do it. It's like, well, why are you doing it, man? Like, but at least we got some authentic place where he's just saying, I know I'm evil and I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
You know, at least we got there. Anyway, that's Tyler's, you know, holier than thou soapbox, I guess. Yeah, it just makes me sad. But also I think kids are smart enough to, I think with the internet today and how kids are constantly like talking to people and stuff like that, I think in some ways kids are smart enough today that they don't. You know, if these kids, if you take 11-year-olds now and put them in the 1980s, they know all the commercials they watch and all the TV shows for like Transformers and shit are just more commercials, right? I think they would be able to pick that out. But anyway, that's a sociological thing that I have no basis for, except for the kid in the story about Roblox that was like, yeah, I'm working on this game, and he's got like 4 windows open with a bunch of game development tools. And it's like, this kid's 30 years old. This kid's a 30-year-old game dev and an 11-year-old body, and he's talking about like, yeah, I'm working on this game and stuff. It's like, who is this? Is people playing Fortnite? Anyway,
He has the energy and time.
well, that's also true. Okay, are we ready to talk about the trouble development of
Rocky
Gollum?
development of Gollum.
Yeah.
Yes. This is from a report by Game 2, which is a German games outlet. But it goes deep into Daedelic's history, which Daedalic is the developer for Lord of the Rings Gollum. Goes into their history, including how the company was formed, how they made a name for themselves with adventure games, and how the company changed after being purchased by Nacon, a French developer or publisher. Sorry. Multiple sources, some even speaking on camera, said CEO Karsten Fichtelman, I'm sure that's right, and COO Stephen Harms fostered a toxic workplace that Fichtelman specifically was often angry and would reduce employees to tears. There was the expectation that Gollum would be a AAA game, but Daedalic was never able to acquire the funding or manpower to develop that kind of game. Gollum's budget ended up being about $15.8 million, which isn't near what AAA games spend on development. And the eventual apologia tweet that was released from Daedalic for how the game performed wasn't written by Daedalic, but by somebody at Nacon without Daedalic's prior knowledge. And according to 2 anonymous sources, Nacon used ChatGPT for the apology. So lazy. So lazy. Anyways, after Gollum's release, Daedalic went to publishing only, and 25 employees were laid off.
Yeah, so that was the result of everything that went down. I watched the video. It's very good. It's in German, but it's got subtitles. Subtitles work perfectly fine to understand the gist of what's going on. It's a very good piece. It's also a really interesting piece of journalism. They put in a little bit of editorial in there, which I thought was interesting. A little bit of a different style, but I thought the video itself was really good. And yeah, it really does dig into. It's another good example of a game. It's not like they started at, I don't know, it's not like they started on flat ground and then they took off and after a while they just crashed. Instead it was like the ground was not
They blew
steady.
up on the runway.
Well, I don't even know about that. It was like the plane wasn't put together. So they're trying to take off without flaps and without windows and stuff. And they're trying to get whatever metaphor you want to overextend. And it's a really good example of that. And I don't know, in the video, they used clips of people like reacting negatively to the game. And a lot of them were content creators. And that made me think, like, and this is something that a lot of people talk about, but I think it's one, we should have honest conversations about whether or not a game is good. I think that's just criticism, right?
Yeah.
So I remember after, like, a couple of years after No Man's Sky came out, there were people that would defend Hello Games because Hello Games, like, their development, their offices flooded at one point or something. And it's like, okay, but none of that, like, what are you supposed to do when talking about a game? Do you have to go to each individual developer and, you know, get a report on how their life is going before you say something about their game? Obviously, that's not something that's possible. And you can criticize a game without being rude or toxic, you know? But a lot of games criticism, I do think, is like rooted in the comedic and the over the top and the toxic.
Yeah.
I think a guy that's famous for that is somebody like Angry Joe. And I think the way you want to direct that, because the way you want to direct that anger is at people who are in positions of power and stuff like that. So it's like it's a scale, I guess. The vitriol that you have should be divvied out relative to the position of power that the person is in. Mm-hmm. So these developers, they made a bad game, but I feel a lot of sympathy for them, especially once you see the story that they went through.
Right.
But like somebody like Bobby Kotick, I don't have any problem saying fuck Bobby Kotick, right? Because he's a billionaire. He's been in a position of power his entire life. So to me, he's past the point of like having to sympathize with. He could have made things better. He hasn't. So you've just failed, and you're past the point of. I'll still treat you like a human being, but you're a human being that's failed to treat other people like a human being. But anyway, so that was sort of my main takeaway was you see the human side of game development and the human side, and it was the same thing with like the Mass Effect 3 video that people make games made, where you kind of see the human toll that game development takes on people, and also this severe backlash takes on people, and how much of that backlash is really useful, or is it just people making fun and tossing, you know, vegetables, tossing apples and onions, you know, onto the stage, as it were. There's also one thing I really liked in the video that sorry, is there anything you guys, there's an example I want to get into, but do you guys have any like major takeaways or anything?
No, it sucks because I didn't watch the video. I just read a article specifically about the Chat GPT thing, and then the
knowing that now explains a lot about that letter.
yeah.
Lord of Ring.
Lord of Ring.
There's also that weird part of the letter that talked about destroying all humans. I thought that was strange.
About the AI will overtake humanity.
Yeah, it was weird.
Only a matter of time. Can't wait. There was that, and then they had examples about how things they had to cut. Like there was specifically a scene that they talked about where they had two major Lord of the Rings characters like speaking to each other, and Gollum like overhears them, and it's like the perspective is Gollum is looking into the window and the two characters are talking to each other, but they weren't given the funds to create that scene, so basically they had to make it so that the camera's just on the window, there's nothing else, and it's just you hear the audio playing over it. So they'd had to like how many corners they had to cut because of the funding that they weren't given. And it sucks. And that also Gollum was supposed to have fights with internal monologue fights with Smeagol. Yeah. And they would go back and forth, but eventually it turned into just Gollum like floating in midair, and you had to make a text selection, and that was it. So yeah, really, really sucks. The ideas that they had probably could have made for an interesting game, but you know, once again, publisher rule screws developers over.
Yeah, and I think Middle-earth Enterprises is. I have always. I don't know if this is accurate, but if you were to ask me before Gollum came out, like, hey, what's an IP that's famous for being stingy and difficult to work with? I would have said, oh, Middle-earth Enterprises. Like, that's one of them. Because they get into legal battles with all kinds of stuff all the time. There was the thing with The Hobbit that I don't even remember, but there was legal trouble with the Hobbit movies, besides the fact that they sucked.
There's
was
the
legal,
Amazon show.
yeah, there was that. I don't know. With the other, Star Wars, it's just like, oh, what do you want to do? Okay, you can do it. Like,
Does it have a lightsaber?
Yeah, nobody
Okay,
gives
cool.
I'm sure working with a Star Wars license isn't easy either. But I've always assumed that like Middle Earth Enterprises is particularly difficult. And it seems like in this video there was some difficulties. But there was one example in this video that I really liked that showcased like why specific things are in Gollum and are also bad. But so Daedalic was known for, they would create their stories first, apparently, in the development process, and then they would create the gameplay, right? Which is interesting because you have a story and then you have to fit the gameplay to fit that context. But in adventure games, that kind of makes sense. Because if you're making adventure games, you kind of already know how the game is going to play because it's an adventure game, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say all adventure games play the same way, but the paradigm is easier to imagine. Where you think first-person shooter, that's really broad, right? Adventure games, there's some variability to it, but you kind of have an idea. So you can make a story, and then you can make the gameplay fit. But with Gollum, they talked about how there are scenes where, like, Gollum, there's a lot of dialogue, and you just have to follow a character around and listen to the dialogue. And it's like, it's weird and it doesn't fit because it's a third-person stealth game, and suddenly you're doing this. Or there are scenes where you have to stop and like eavesdrop or whatever. Doesn't seem to make sense. And they explained it in the video that it's because of this mentality that they sort of come up with story beats first or story details first, and then they fit that to the context of the game. But what happens if you create the story and then the game you're creating
doesn't fit the story?
Doesn't really have like moments where you can eloquently put in the story because it's a third person. And I thought, wow, there's a direct line between like a studio having a certain workflow, having a certain experience in something, and then when they try to take their skills and apply it to a different genre, it doesn't work. And I thought, holy shit, that's a really good example right there. Really interesting. And also it's one of those things where it's not like the developers didn't try. It's not like they didn't care. I think they were set up to fail in some respects. But that's a good example. And one thing I've always asked is, how difficult is it for studios to make a game that they're not a genre that they're not used to making? Because it happens. Creative Assembly made Alien Isolation, and it was like, well, look at that. And I've always it seemed like it's a kind of a toss-up. Some studios can, some studios can't. But here is a really good example with specific details, like specific instances in a game where it's like you can almost see the fault in the philosophy of how to make a game and how to write a game. And I thought that was a really good piece of journalism and a really cool way to understand why a game doesn't work. And I think part of the video that I thought was interesting was they have some editorial in the video they talk about the game being bad. Like they don't pull any punches. They were like, the game was bad. They even have like a minute-long review of it where they sort of recap the reasons why the game is bad. But in this 30-minute video, they fit, here's why the game was bad, with empathizing with the developers and showing their humanity. I was like, that's really good. That's a really good way. That's good games criticism and good games journalism right there. So good for Game. What are they called?
Game 2.
Game 2. Check them out. From Germany. Go check them out. Do we have anything else we want to say about this?
I don't think so.
I just want to tack on something about companies or IPs being stingy to work with. Fun little history fact for Dungeons and Dragons. When it was initially released, Dungeons and Dragons was sued by the Tolkien estate because they were using the term hobbit.
Oh, really? Is that why?
That's why they're halflings, not hobbits.
Got it.
So did Tolkien come up with hobbit?
Yes.
Yeah.
But he didn't come up with elf.
No, elf is from I'm not sure if he came up with hobbit, but they have at least the trademark of the use hobbit. Elf comes from old mythology. It is elves and elf-like creatures exist through many different cultural mythologies. Same with dwarves. If
you were a necromancer, that's what you would do. You wouldn't create a zombie army. You would find the bones of the guy that created, the name of a come up with the guy that invented the elf, res him real quick and be like, hey, you've got basically every dollar on Earth's worth of royalties that you're owed. And then once he gets all the money, you're the necromancer. You kill him, you take it. There's my jokey D&D plot line that I'm gonna write. Are we ready for tidbits?
Yeah.
Okay. What if I told you, in this world, there are bits, and there are tids, and Richard is the only man who can put them together into tidbits.
Still want but we need a visual to accompany it. We can't just leave. Anyways,
we'll get on that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It doesn't. It's not it's more work is what it is. Dredge, the game Dredge has surpassed internal expectations, which is a very good thing. Black Salt Games' Eldritch fishing adventure Dredge has sold over 1 million copies since launching in March of 2023. Dredge producer Nadia Thorne shared the milestone with GameDeveloper.com during an interview with PAX Australia. And they said, quote, "We hope to maybe sell 100,000 copies in our first year," said Thorne. "That would have been amazing. That was a top estimate when we were setting our expectations, and we have smashed through those targets." The studio is now preparing to launch its first official expansion for Dredge in the form of The Pale Reach on November 16th, 2023.
Good for them. A game is on my list of games that I need to play, but I probably won't get to for a while.
Yeah. It's I have a coworker who's played it and is astonished by it, so
that's cool.
It is cool. I'm not interested.
You have anything else?
I do.
Sorry.
No, that's how I want. Just finding a way to jump into it. Yeah, this is the last tidbit, but we have a bit of a controversy with Final Fantasy VII, and this is not very long, but I'll try to be as detailed as I can. Last week, Square Enix created a post on Twitter which clarified the pronunciation of a character's name. That character on Final Fantasy VII is a character that most people refer to as Cait Sith.
Okay.
And that name is spelled CaitSith. Since 1997, he's a marshmallow-looking creature with like a cat riding on top of him. Since the release back in 1997, there's been a very small discussion about the pronunciation of the character's name. Square Enix now says it's Cait Sith. When revealed, there became a heated argument on Twitter, which delved into something greater. It turns out Cait Sith is a creature that is inspired by Irish and Scottish mythology. His name is actually supposed to be pronounced Ketshi. A vocal group of fans who hail from Irish and Scottish heritage have come out against Square Enix's announcement by stating that Square Enix is doing a disservice to the Gaelic language by not taking the opportunity to keep the name, and by doing so erasing Gaelic culture, which is something that has been happening for a very, very long time. Along with the fact that the Gaelic language is still being struggled to be kept alive, those who want the culture to survive have a little more reason to be vocal, but that is the situation. But
why wouldn't they change it, I wonder? It's more unique.
I think it's more unique as well. I think it's just more problems with how many times they have to localize it in like different cultures and whatnot.
Oh, okay.
Apparently in Japanese, they do say Ketshi, but they bring it to America, especially at time during the 90s when localization was very iffy. It's just like, that's what it is. Cait Sith, you know.
America definitely doesn't have a history of changing people's names. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Whoops.
But yeah, no, it was a very big thing because there's several personalities who are big fans of Final Fantasy VII, and when they were like, "Oh yeah, I told you it was Cait Sith," it became a whole thing, and they ended up finding out that from Gaelic origins, and then they found out the history of the Gaelic language, and they were like, "Oh shit, sorry, like it should be Cait Sith, or I mean Ketshi," but yeah, Square Enix is sticking to Cait Sith.
Maybe people should just go full rebellion, just start pronouncing it the other way.
I'm usually the
type of shit about.
I'm usually the type of person that if I find out I'm pronouncing something wrong, I'm gonna fix it.
But even if it's at the behest of Square Enix.
So you want to erase the Gaelic culture and language?
No. I'm saying the other way around.
No, he's saying everyone should just continue pronouncing it Ketshi.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
We're all on the same page here.
I'm saying regardless of what Square Enix says.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in agreement.
Oh, well, okay. Because I said the thing and I felt like you didn't have to add that second part because that's what made me go like, oh.
Richard, listen, I can't uncancel you. You've already canceled yourself.
I cancel myself every day, buddy.
Hashtag
Do you have any other
cancel Richard.
tidbits?
Castlevania 64 is actually good. No, I don't. That was it. That was it.
I like that your controversial take is something that nobody but like 12 other dudes would give a shit about. No offense, Castlevania.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Dozens of us.
Dozens.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, I would have had another one, but somebody decided to turn into a whole story. So.
Well, I'm sorry.
kidding.
You want to erase Daedalus experience? How about that? Canceled twice. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at the Gaming Discourse. Go to our YouTube channel, YouTube/Gaming Discourse. We'll have a new episode of Gaming Discourse FM this week.
Mm-hmm.
Gaming Discourse, Patreon.com/Gaming Discourse, all that stuff.
Bye-bye.